thank you very much for inviting me to come and have a chat with everybody on the topic of good practices for scientific communication and good abstracts. Those things are very, very closely related, and I'm kind of going to be talking about the whole overall arching thing about scientific communication, and giving a few hints and tips as well as I go along. Now, of course, massive amounts has been written about how to write good abstracts and how to be good at scientific communication, and I've provided references in my slides to various bits and pieces and blog posts and the like that I found interesting and useful for this point of view. But for the moment, it's just giving an overview, and I hope you enjoy it. So we'll start off with well, why do we bother with scientific communication in the first place? We're doing our jobs as scientists, and why do we have to talk? Why do we have to talk to people? Talking to people can be hard. Communicating our science can be hard. And the reason is, the entire premise of science is that we are working together to build on the work that other people have done. We are incrementally advancing the sum total of human knowledge. And there's the classic Isaac Newton quote, saying, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, which is very accurate and very true. But it's also important to remember that with scientific progress, you don't have to be a giant for somebody to stand on your shoulders and to see that little bit further. You just need to be able to communicate and share the results of your work and your research in a way that helps them understand it, so they can then develop it and see that little bit further. So one of the main ways that we as scientists publish our work or communicate our work is by writing articles and writing reports and writing things. And it's a case of, well, why do we publish these things? And fundamentally, what it comes down to is that we publish written texts and reports and abstracts and conference presentations and all that sort of stuff, so other people can read or consume that information, they can understand it, and then they can use it in their own work and they can build on it. And the really handy thing about writing an article or a report, or even videoing a talk and putting it online later, is that people around the world with access can learn about what you're presenting at their own pace and at their own time, and it doesn't matter where in the world they are, as long as they've got an internet connection. And I think this is a massively, massively valuable piece of technology that we have available to us. It's quite astonishing when you think about it. Historically speaking, research articles literally used to be one researcher writing to another researcher going, dear sir, here is the results of my latest experiment, what do you think? And then academic journals basically came together with the proceedings of the Royal Society and collected up the letters from the researchers and then copied them and published them in a booklet and sent them out to other researchers. So it became more of a centralized thing. But now we've come so far and we've got so much great technology, we can really enable the free flowing of information. And that means the free flowing of your work and the work that you've done and are really proud of. So of course, scientific communication covers everything. It covers talking to the public, it covers talking to other researchers, everything like that. And it's really, really important to realize that talking to the public is something that, yes, actually you do want to be doing. I mean, at the very least, you want to be able to explain to your friends and family what it is you do all day. But you also need to be able to communicate to your funders why you deserve to be funded. And also being enthusiastic and helping teach people about science is really good thing too. And you can also fight misinformation and fake science. And Lord knows there's an awful lot of that about at the moment. The important thing with all scientific communication, doesn't matter whether it's spoken or written or whatever, or video cartoons, what you have to do is you have to think about your audience. And you have to put yourself in your audience shoes and ask yourself, what is it they actually want to know? This cartoon is great because the little old lady is asking, well, what was the time? And the researcher is going, well, it depends on your definition of time and stuff like that. And it's a case of, no, that's not the question she was asking. So think about your audience. It's really useful to have an elevator pitch where you can explain in 10 to 15 seconds or so what it is you do in words that most people can understand. And the key thing there is that words that people can understand. So without jargon. Jargon is really useful when you're talking to people who know what the jargon actually means, and it means and it's completely incomprehensible for people who don't, and it can be really difficult. And if you're used to always using acronyms and jargon, that can actually be quite a significant barrier to communicating with other people. And then the last point, can you tie it to their personal experience? This is a theme that's going to come back. It's can you make a story out of what you're doing? Because humans are very, very good at listening to and understanding stories, and we like stories an awful lot because they make sense for us. Of course, the wonderful world of the internet means that you can share your research and learn about things from pretty much everyone. The downside is that this means that there are also people who will decide that because they saw a YouTube video on the subject, they are automatically an expert. So if you are in the situation of having to defend your research and having people arguing with you about it, don't worry about it. It happens. The important thing is words of wisdom for life. Do not feed the trolls. And if somebody's just trying to get a rise out of you or wanting to provoke an argument and you don't have the time or the mental energy, you just walk away. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. The important thing is that when you are communicating, you're remembering who it is you're communicating to and what it is you're trying to say to them. Apologies for the swears on this slide, which I've only just realized. But I'll carry on regardless. It's really, enthusiasm about our research is brilliant. It's what we got into research to do, and it's really a nice thing, I always maintain, to see somebody who is enthusiastic about what it is they're doing and why they're doing. But it's also important to remember, again, looking at your audience, not everyone shares your passion, and that's all right. That's all right. And again, be prepared to adjust your communication style as you get involved in a conversation. And remember that a conversation is two-way. It's not just you info dumping on somebody all the stuff you've learned. You kind of want to engage with them to encourage those questions and answers, even if perhaps in the case of journal articles, the communication and the conversation happens over a time period of years. That's perfectly all right too. Just a plug to say that neurodiversity is common. For some people, they find statistics really, really difficult and numbers really, really difficult. Some people find words really difficult. Some people really understand really complex concepts really easily, but that's all right. It's just remember that if somebody is struggling with numbers, don't think it's because they're stupid, because they're not. Listen to their response and modify the way you talk and how you explain things accordingly. So my next few slides are from the Upturned Microscope, which I highly recommend. And this particular little group of slides from them is all about scientific communication. So here we have the science journalist who is talking to the researcher in the lab and saying, okay, we're recording, so tell me about your research. And the PI, or not the PI, the researcher goes off on, in our last paper, we demonstrate that the P457 subtype of transcriptome associated blah 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 blah, and I've lost the plot there with all those words and all that jargon. Myself, admittedly, I'm a physicist, not a biologist, but there we go. But unsurprisingly, the scientific journalist goes, can you simplify it a little? And the researcher goes, okay, in our latest paper, we show that blah, 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 blah. So it's a way, you've got to be aware of what you're actually doing by way of simplifying, in inverted commas, your conversation with people who don't necessarily understand what it is you're talking about. The important thing is the communication. You are transferring a concept from your brain or an idea from your brain to their brain through the noisy and lossy channel, which is the human voice, and that can be really difficult. Then we've got the other side of the situation where the scientific journalist is interviewing the professor and saying that, please, this is for a public non-scientific audience, so please keep that in mind when you explain your research. And the professor goes completely the other direction. And is really quite patronizing in that. We did us some that sweet science, he says there, and we found us some dem good stuff for all y'all, derp derp. And it's kind of like, yeah. And unsurprisingly, the scientific journalist at the bottom is looking really quite annoyed by this. So yeah, you've got to be careful to find that balance point, that sweet spot between the too technical and the utterly patronizing. And then, of course, this entire plot line just finishes up with the prof going, and that's what the science is all about. You've got enough for your press release, and the journalist going, not really, this story is still a bit too complicated for a lay audience. And then the prof just kind of waves her off with, well, just throw us a Star Wars reference in there or something. And if you can do that, if you can throw a Star Wars reference in, that's fair enough. But as the scientific journalist says in the third panel, it's cancer research. It's really hard to do that. So beware of the really tenuous links that are used to kind of throw into your research to try and make it accessible for people which aren't really related at all. Anyway, the upturned microscope, again, highly recommended. I'm slightly going to veer into doing presentations a little bit. Sorry, Nikki, but I won't be saying that much. What I will say is that just like if you're going to do a presentation at a conference or in front of your colleagues for a seminar or a webinar or something, practice is vital. But you can practice your elevator pitch as well. You can practice talking with people about your research in a way that is a good way of communicating with them at the different levels, because the more you talk through things, the easier and smoother you get at explaining them. And I said, remember, you're telling a story. You don't have to go into the nitty-gritty details. And as I said, again, it's all about conversation. If you can get people asking questions and feeling comfortable to ask questions, that's a really good way of helping sort out any misunderstandings or anything like that. When you're talking to your colleagues as well, I mean, it's important to remember that if you're at a conference or if you're talking to them down the coffee lounge or on a video call or whatever, you've got to remember as well that even though you've been thinking about this work for the past however long, months, years, whatever, this might be the first time they're actually hearing this information. And oftentimes you're trying to explain something that has taken you months or years to understand, and you're expecting them to, or trying to get them to understand it in the space of, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so. And that isn't an awful lot of time. And of course, people are distracted by life. That's what happens. Everybody gets distracted by things, and that's normal. So be aware of that. The blog post that this particular cartoon comes from is very good as well. I highly recommend it too. I will very quickly skip over the virtual presentations because Nikki's going to be covering them. Yeah, I just say that my top tip is actually getting dressed up and wearing formal clothes that you wear to present to a conference is actually really useful for getting yourself into the right mindset for presenting. But that's what works for me. My other top tip for virtual presentations is if you find yourself in the situation where it feels really weird speaking to an empty room or just speaking to your computer. So what I have for my virtual presentations is I have Chunkster McSparkle, the panda here, who sits next to my computer and is my audience for when I'm presenting. So it makes me feel like I'm actually presenting to someone rather than just to the empty air. Anyway, there we go. I'm now going to slide into abstracts. And then I will then move on from there and start talking more about the articles and the writing side of scientific communication. Okay. So generally, you've got two sort of abstracts. You have the abstract for the conference that is happening in 7 months from now, according to the cartoon there from PhD Comics, also highly recommended. And I'm sure that if you've ever been to a conference and have written an abstract for a conference, there's always been that feeling of, well, what am I actually going to be able to present in 7 months? But I need to write an abstract now. So that's when you start getting a bit vague and woolly around the edges. And I think that's very common if you're presenting at conferences, but for exactly that reason. You're trying to predict what your results you're going to have 7 months from now in the future. For journal articles, for scientific reports, you should already have done the work. So you should know exactly what it is you're putting into your article or your scientific report. So your article should be clear and concise and sum up what's in your paper. That's really important, because it's really important to remember as well, the title and the abstract may be the only part of your paper that gets read. So we're moving away into more research articles being freely available online, either through open access journals or as preprints or whatever, which is very useful for people. But back in the days when everything was subscription based, the abstract was the only thing that was freely available. So the abstract had to sell the content of your paper. Yeah, as it says in this particular slide here in this tip, also from a very good set of cartoons, the title of your paper and your abstract was really what gave people the understanding of whether or not it was worth them actually getting hold of your paper or not. So you really need to be able to kind of sum up very efficiently and effectively what is in your paper, in your abstract. And keywords are becoming more and more important as time goes by as well. If you can use keywords effectively, that is a great help. And in terms of keywords, I'm talking specific keywords, or rather than general terms. So Patterns is a data science journal, so we get an awful lot of articles that are tagged artificial intelligence or machine learning, which is grand, no problem at all. There are an awful lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning papers out there at the moment, and the number is only getting bigger. So trying to kind of narrow down what particular bit of AI and machine learning you're actually talking about can actually be really tricky if the only keywords are AI and machine learning. So think about your keywords. They enable people to search. Keywords enable people to search more effectively and therefore be able to find your paper that much more easily. So there's the link there at the bottom, writing an abstract for your research paper, and I've nobbled some text from that particular article because I think it was a really good one. Because it gives, here are the typical kinds of information found in most abstracts, right? So it's the context or background information for your research. So what is the general topic that you're studying? What is the specific topic of your research? And then it's kind of, what is the central questions, or what is the problem that your research addresses? Putting it into context, what's already known about this question? What previous research has been done or shown? And then, excuse me, the main reasons why you've done this research. What's your rationale? What's your goals? Why did you do all this? And then you go into your research and or analytical methods, or how you did it. Then you've got your main findings, results, or arguments, what you learned. And then you've got the significance or implications of your findings or arguments. And that feels like an awful lot to shove into what is often only 150, 200 words, something like that. But it is possible. It is definitely possible. It might need a bit of practice, however. So here, again, taken from the same blog article, this is an example of an actual abstract that was published in Cell Stem Cell. And the authors in the article have kind of gone through and kind of color coded the sections of the abstract according to what they actually do within the abstract itself. There are more examples on the blog post as well of a different type. So there's a humanities one as well as this, but I picked this one because it was a scientific one. And basically it says there, the first sentence announces the topic under study, summarizes what's already known or been accomplished in previous research, and signals the rationale and goals for the new research, and how and the problem as well. And then you've got the yellow section, which is all about the methods and the description of the results. And then at the end, very importantly, you've got your significance or implications, what this actually means. And those bits are really important. It's kind of, why did you do it? How did you do it? And why is it important? Those are all very key things to ask. Putting your work into context is absolutely vital, right? There is an awful lot of literature out there. I really appreciate that. And it can be hard to read everything that's going on in your field and everything that's been published. But having an understanding of what has been going on helps you come up with a story of your research, why you did it, how you did it, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so there's a few questions there that kind of come on from the previous couple of slides. It's like when you're thinking about how to describe what you've done, it's kind of like, why did you do it? Who else has done work on it, and what did this tell us? How did you do it? When and where did you do it? Because sometimes that's really important. What did you learn? And then why is it important? Why have you put the effort into doing this research? And that's really important to keep yourself grounded and keep yourself focused on what the problem is and what you're wanting to achieve. XKCD did a great cartoon about types of scientific paper, as you can see there, which has been much parodied across all the various different scientific domains. So have a look out for those. But you can see definitely the general trends of the types of paper that do occur. And have a think about it. Is your paper something along the lines of, we put a camera somewhere new, for example? If so, you might want to think about, well, how do I rephrase that? How do I show it's more interesting? That sort of thing. Okay, I've mentioned storytelling quite a lot because I think having a coherent and smooth story going through your publication, your article, or your research report is really helpful for when it comes to explaining what you've done, how you've done it. And basically, as I said earlier, humans we're very keen on stories. I mean, the fact that we tell each other stories all the time, and we consume stories in audio form, in written form, as fiction, as history, whatever, on the television, as movies, we do this for fun. We very much enjoy having that whole notion of a story with a start, middle, and an end. And if you think about it, the standard journal article or research reports structure of aims, methods, results, conclusions is telling you the story of, we wanted to do this, here's how we attempted to do it, this is what happened when we did the things that we were doing, and then this is what the conclusions that we've come up with as a result. That is a nice arc of flow of, we did this and then we did this and we learned this, and that's really quite useful to be able to explain to people what your research is all about. Relating your research might be really, really difficult. It might be really difficult to relate it to your existing experience, for example. I mean, it depends what it is you're studying. If you're studying quantum mechanics, then trying to connect it to real world experiences can be really, really difficult. But again, it depends. So yeah, so that infographic there is really nice. It's just takes different bits. A story, if broken down into the simplest form, is a connection of cause and effect. And that's really nice, because that's what science is attempting to do. We're attempting to figure out what the causes are and the effects. You run an experiment, you start off with the cause, and then you find the effect at the end of it. That's really nice. They say the simplest story is more successful, and yes, it can be, but it can also be really difficult to simplify stories effectively. without losing the detail. Now, as I said earlier, sometimes you want to be glossing over the detail because the person you're talking to really isn't interested in the in-depth of your exactly what chemical solutions you used in your experiment, or exactly what Python code you use. So you might want to gloss over some of those details. But for, again, thinking of who your audience are, for scientists and other researchers, it's really helpful to kind of be prepared to go into that detail. But again, having that flow, as I said, is really, really useful. Moving from stories into graphs and figures and stuff like that via the very convenient XKCD as well, you can describe stories in really, really complicated and in-depth ways. You can also describe stories and describe your research in visual forms, like time series graphs or whatever. Now, the important thing to remember with these is they can get really, really complicated really, really quickly. And when you're trying to explain something visually, that's often a different way of thinking things and looking at things than if you were trying to explain a concept in words. So that's important to remember as well. There are plenty of articles online all about how best to create graphs and communicate science in infographics and that sort of thing. So I do recommend looking them up. The Information is Beautiful website is really, really good for showing graphs and information in visual ways that are also really easy and intuitive to understand. So I recommend having a look at that. You can, of course, the aim is to make your tables and figures self-explanatory, and that includes kind of things like labeling them properly. Label your axes, please. The amount of times I've seen unlabeled axes just drives me absolutely, yes, bananas. Be careful of chart junk as well. Chart junk is the name given to all those associated kind of random pictures that gets put on figures and charts, which are supposedly to kind of help with understanding, but often do more to just confuse things and make people uncertain of what's going on. The point there, make sure the resolution is good enough to be easily read. I failed on that horribly last slide with the XKCD thing. You could not read any of the lines on those particular charts. Those charts are really interesting from an information visualization point of view, but actually looking at them is really difficult because the resolution was not good enough. It's also important to remember as well that when you're using color, think about whether or not somebody who is colorblind could understand the figure as it is. There are websites out there where you can upload figures and it will give you a test and tell you whether or not the figure is suitable for somebody with color blindness. But think about accessibility for other readers with your work, with all your work, and that includes your reports and your research articles, but also your websites as well, your project websites and things like that too. That's very important. I'm now going to kind of go into just kind of point by point hints and tips sort of things. Analogies are great things when it comes to trying to make connections with people, right? But you've got to be careful with them, because you can say things like, near the surface of Venus, the atmosphere is so dense and the pressure is so high that to a grain of sand, it's surprisingly similar to an ocean environment, right? That sounds plausible, but then you get to the actual bit of what the values actually are. So the ocean is temperature 46 degrees Fahrenheit, composition H2O, and then you've got your two grain of sands there going, oh, this is quite nice, isn't it? And then, well, Venus actually is, the temperature is 864 degrees Fahrenheit, and the composition is carbon dioxide. That's completely different. So yes, it's the analogy sort of works, but it also really falls down if you look at it in the right way. So analogies they can be really handy and really useful, but yeah, just be careful of them. The other thing to be careful about is your acronyms as well. Explain your acronyms, explain your jargon. Everybody, even people who are in the field and who use acronyms on a regular basis, sometimes it's really easy to get lost in all the 3-letter acronyms, the TLAs that get thrown around the place. And if you're trying to communicate your research to somebody outside your field, they're going to get completely lost if they don't understand what your acronyms are, because your acronym, they could have an acronym in your field, in their fields, that is exactly the same letters but means something completely different. So again, think about your audience and who you're communicating with. I put this slide here, be honest. So way back several years ago now, January 2013, good Lord, there was a Twitter trend for overly honest research methods. And I love that Twitter thread because it was the place where researchers collected all the information that they didn't necessarily put in their research articles, right? And this is all the really important and really quite funny stuff that gets left out and could actually be really important and vital in the future. I mean, I love the picture of the bird there. With the comment, seeds were planted in a grid with cells 75 centimeters apart. An exception to this was made in block 2, where there was a nesting killdeer family. Seeds in this area were planted 2 meters away from the nest. And I think that's entirely sensible and should be recorded. And also you've got a picture of a cute bird there, so that's a win. But yeah, when you're being honest and about your research and being open and clear about the limitations of your study, you are helping people understand what's going on, and you're helping them to understand what went right and what didn't go right, and so they don't waste time going along the false trails or in the blind alleys that you went along, so they can kind of skip those and kind of move that little bit further in the same amount of time. As I said, think of your audience. When you're writing, when you're talking, be sure to think about what key assumptions you're making, the basic ones, because oftentimes they can trip you up. So you could be working with a basic assumption of one thing, and your audience might not understand it, and that might be that one bit of the foundation that means that they just don't get anything else that you're talking about, and that's really that's a vital piece of information to be able to kind of communicate across. It's all right to ask for help from your colleagues. And that's not just from the point of view of proofreading, although proofreading and fresh eyes are great for spotting elusive mistakes that you just can't see. But it's also good to help get their guidance and their stories about how they've done scientific communication in the past, what it is they've learned from it. Get them to cast their eye over things. It's really useful that way. From the point of a journal editor-in-chief, please don't leave out important bits of your methods. There's that step in the middle which says, and then a miracle occurs. I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. Yes, please. Don't leave out important bits of your methods. Don't leave out important bits of your research or try to gloss over them. It's not helpful. It doesn't help scientific reproducibility at all in the slightest. If you need to put appendices in and go, step 2, we did this thing, please see Appendix A for further details, and then carry on, that's perfectly all right. So people can actually go and actually look at what was done, rather than just going a hand wave, well, then something happened, and then we move swiftly onwards. Nowadays, as well, we're getting more and more people using more and more software code and more data, and those parts of the scientific record are vital. They need to be saved and they need to be shared too. So I'm going to do a quick digression into the importance of data, because I'm a data scientist. And it kind of ties in with the fundamental aspects of research in general, in that science is all about reproducibility. Other people doing the same experiments in the same way should get the same results, right? That doesn't necessarily happen, but we do need to have access to data that was collected to confirm that the science is valid, all right? False facts and inaccessible data undermine science and its credibility, and that's really, really important. So I'm basically putting in a plea here to say, share your data, share your code whenever possible. And of course, we want to make it possible for data producers to share their data and code and get credit for it. And there's the data availability statements in journal articles, which provide an easy to find place for the authors and the readers to go, okay, the data sets used in this particular article can be found at this particular data repository. And it gives a quick understanding of where the data and code can be found, whether it's in a repository or on the lead author's hard drive, although we're very much moving away and pushing for, gently nudging for the lead author not to be storing data on their hard drive anymore, and what the requirements are for accessing data. And also, if these forms are standardized and are all in the same locations in the articles, this means that it's easy for machine reading systems to pick them up, and also automatic generation of links to things too, which is also really handy. So you'll have the article, and then you can click on a link, and then bam, you're straight at the data set, which is really, really useful, really useful. Okay, other random bits and pieces, check for typos. They creep in despite the best efforts of everybody, especially important places like references, author list, titles. And I'm going to read out the slide because I think it's hilarious. Whenever you feel silly or stupid, whenever you feel like a lot of people are smarter than you, just remember on January the 1st, 2016 at 2 p.m, according to Google Scholar, there were 77 academic citations for a journal called Experimental Brian Research. There we go. And I find that utterly hilarious. If you're looking and doing proofreading and you've been staring at the same document for a long time, I've heard that changing the font size and color can trick your brain into seeing the text as being something completely new and give you fresh eyes to do it. Getting someone else to proofread it is also really useful. All right, quick blurb of communicating with editors, because you're going to be doing that if you're publishing an academic journal article. The key thing to remember is editors want to help you communicate your research, right? And we want to be able to help you, and we want you to help us to help you. So just a few tips there. When you have the opportunity to write a cover letter about your research, write a good one. Spell it out in great and glorious detail at the very beginning, why your research is important and why we should consider it for our article. Say why it's in scope, say why it's important, right? And then, as I mentioned earlier, write a good abstract, have clear and useful keywords. As I mentioned, there's the little factoid that machine learning in Scopus comes up with 280,810 document results. That's an awful lot. If you are given the opportunity to suggest potential reviewers, please do, because the editors might not take you up on those suggestions, but at least it'll give them an indication of what sort of fields you think are appropriate. And then, very importantly, and I've had this happen to me more times than I can count, I have had cover letters, which are obviously form letters, which are, dear editor, here is my paper that I submit to your highly esteemed journal, insert journal name here. Right, or worse, here is my paper that I submit to your highly esteemed journal, and then the name is not of my journal at all, and I'm start thinking things like, is this a simultaneous submission, and automatically either bounce it or have to start asking the authors questions along the lines of, did you really mean to do that? And it doesn't give a good impression at all. I think I'm nearly running out of time, so I will quickly carry on. Just to say, different journals have different editorial bars when it comes to things like novelty, impact, and interest to the articles they publish. Just because your paper gets rejected by Nature doesn't mean it'll never get published. Rejection is really, really normal for high impact journals. Sometimes it's acceptance rates are of the order like 10% or something like that. That's normal. when you think about impact, it's important to think of how is this new and how is this exciting? What difference does this make? I mean, the high impact paper there is Isaac Newton looking at apples falling and going, oh, gravity. So that's high impact, but it's the low impact is, well, oranges also follow the law of gravity. Okay, fair enough. So bear that in mind when you're thinking about your work and where you're going to aim it. Also, again, think about your audience. Who are you wanting to tell your research to? Are you wanting to talk about it to other scientists in exactly your field? Then that will impact which journals you submit to. Reviewers, you will have reviews. They will undoubtedly be uncomfortable at times. I always maintain myself, and have done for many years, that if my article didn't get shredded by reviewers, I'd be a bit worried that they hadn't read it properly. The aim of the review process is to make the paper better and more understandable. Yes, there will be times when the reviewer will just not get it. That happens. You might wind up in the situation where you'll have to push back against the review going, no, the reviewer is wrong because this, and this. But a big part of publishing your research is helping other people understand it. So if you can work with your reviewer and go, oh, you didn't understand this, but so I've rephrased it in this particular way to kind of explain it that bit better. That's far more sensible than going, reviewer 3 is awful and didn't understand a thing. Again, remember, it's all about communicating, and the point of the review process is to make that communication better, make what you're saying more understandable and more useful. Nearly there. I've mentioned the joys of reviewer 3 then, the metaphorical reviewer 3. And I will say as well that you can learn an awful lot about writing research articles by reading them. And you can also learn an awful lot from peer reviewing research articles too. Acting as a peer reviewer for articles, it helps give you the understanding of what other people did, and then helps you hone your abilities to go, okay, they did this thing in particular that I think wasn't the best choice. What would I suggest as an alternative? Or figuring out ways to suggest and suggestions to improve things as well. So so think about peer reviewing, because I think it's a really good way of learning how to structure an article, how to get your arguments across and tell your story. Right, and that is everything from me, just to kind of leave you with the bit of the slide that is all about patterns. And I'll take a minute to say that we're a data science journal. We share data science solutions to real-world problems across domain boundaries. So if you have a data science solution to a real-world problem and would like to come and talk to me about it, then my contact details are available, and I'd be delighted to have a chat. Okay, I will stop there now. Thank you very much for your attention.